It's the threat of physical abuse, torture and imprisonment. Also sex, gender and satire. We talked to noted Australian cartoonist Cathy Wilcox about the lack of women in her field. And Parisians vote in their first ever woman mayor. Not a day goes past without Egypt being in the news thanks to ongoing instability. The country is now facing daily protests in the wake of last year's ousting of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. But for the women who take part in those protests are now running an additional risk of imprisonment and torture. France Van Cat's Sonia Dridi and Catherine Stapley sent us through this report.
This area of Cairo is an Islamist stronghold. We're here to meet Gihad, an 18-year-old student from Al-Azhar University. She still bears the scars of 2 months in an Egyptian prison. Last November, she'd been protesting against the government on the campus. On the way home on the metro, a fellow passenger saw her four-finger rabaa badge, the symbol of resistance of ousted President Mohamed Morsi's supporters. He alerted the police, and Gihad was arrested.
They tied my hands to my feet behind me. They hit me with belts, electrocuted me. They kept insulting me, kicking me with their feet.
Her leg, her arm and her jaw were broken. She claims the prison authorities forced her to sign a document saying she sustained those injuries falling out of bed. Gihad's brother believes detaining women is a deliberate tactic on the part of the authorities.
She went through a lot with this fascist regime. They are arresting girls to pressure the men not to go to the demonstrations.
Battles between security forces and students occur almost daily as campuses across Egypt have become the focal point of protest for those who oppose the current regime. And it's not only those who support the ousted President Mohamed Morsi. Annette was part of the Tamarud campaign that launched the anti-Morsi protests that led to his ouster last year. Also a student at Al-Azhar University, she was arrested as police stormed the campus. She was taken first to a military detention camp, where female detainees were used to humiliate men.
They made the boys take off their clothes in front of us and started to beat them in front of our eyes. They want to break the boys in front of the girls and vice versa.
She then spent 50 days in the notorious Qanater women's prison. While there, a woman prison guard subjected her to an invasive vaginal search.
The prison search was like the worst form of sexual harassment. It wasn't a virginity test, but we felt that after what we were subjected to, we weren't going to be virgins anymore.
According to women's rights activists, a lack of accountability means the number of such cases has risen since the Egyptian revolution in 2011.
They basically know that they can get away with it, and the escalation of the violence that they commit and the sexual violence keeps increasing more and more. We believe that there is a shrinking of the public space for women because of all the violations taking place.
The Egyptian government has vowed to quell the student demonstrations. But despite the risk of repression, most of the female protesters who've been arrested are still determined to make their voices heard.
And that report by Sonia Dridi and Catherine Stapley. Now, watching that story with me in the studio is noted Australian cartoonist Cathy Wilcox. She's here to attend a Cartooning for Peace festival in the French city of Montpellier, and where a collection of her works will also be on display. Cathy, thanks for being with us. I understand you've been drawing your response to what you've just seen. What, in fact, did you come up with?
I was putting the situation for the women in Egypt and places like that. So the woman there is claiming freedom for women to protest, and the armed man coming back at her, the military person coming back saying, "Carry on, and we'll punish you in the usual way." So it's kind of encapsulating the damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of predicament that
just
they
how
find themselves
hard
in.
is it to sort of, within that very tiny image, convey so much, but at the same time use humour to get the message across?
Well, there are times, I suppose, where humour is not the main point. It's sometimes a happy byproduct because of, I suppose, turning an idea a bit laterally. But I suppose I try generally to reduce things down to their, reduced ad absurdum kind of thing. So that once you've reduced something down to the bases of its logic, it exposes in that way how ridiculous it is.
Why are there so few women cartoonists?
Annette, I hate this question.
And why is that?
And why do I hate this question? Because, all right, I don't see it necessarily as an anti-woman conspiracy. There are not actually that many cartoonists as a job in the world. I was aware of another cartoonist senior to me when I was first sort of starting out and interested in that field. And for me, it was probably sufficient to see that there was one woman doing it, if I were to have wondered about that. But I already loved looking at cartoons. So it was just sort of seeing that kind of thing in the paper and thinking that's where I want to be, that's what I want to do. And I think I've always sought to have my work speak for itself. And I was given a really lucky, opportunity. I started out in Australian newspapers when more or less anyone could have a shot, and I was tried out against 3 other people who happened to be men. And at the end of the trial, they said, you've got the job.
OK, Cathy, and moving on, and in other news this week, the French President, François Hollande, has reshuffled his cabinet, with half of the 16 ministers still being women. The move follows recent municipal elections in which his Socialist Party was trounced. In those elections, out of the 41 cities with more than 100,000 people, only 6 elected female mayors. But one of those cities was indeed Paris. Carl Brown has more on the socialist candidate, Anne Hidalgo, on becoming the city's first ever woman mayor.
Je suis la première femme.
I'm the first female mayor of Paris.
After spending more than a decade in the shadow of her predecessor, Anne Hidalgo has emerged into the limelight. Her political path began with modest beginnings. Hidalgo's parents brought her as a toddler from southwestern Spain to a working-class suburb of Lyon. She became a French national at the age of 14 and later moved north to the capital to work as a labor inspector. In 1994, she joins the Socialist Party, and 5 years later, she's taken on by Paris Mayor Bertrand Delanoë, who in 2001 appoints her as his deputy, a post she retains for 13 years, loyal though nursing ambitions of her own. In 2012, she announces her candidacy for the top job.
When you work with Anne and get to know her, you fall under her spell because she's an intelligent woman who works extremely hard. She has an extraordinary ability to organize people and get things moving. Also, she's funny. With her, there's never a dull moment.
Lauded for her green credentials, Hidalgo plans to bolster the city's bike and car rentals, the Velib and Autolib, by adding electric scooters. And she's set an ambitious zero diesel goal for 2020 to cut down on the often high levels of Paris pollution. The mayor-elect also aims to increase the capital's stock of social housing. In her first days as mayor, she visited with anti-poverty campaign groups.
I have committed to working with the major organisations, Emmaüs, Challenge and Aurore, to make the fight against extreme poverty in Paris a priority. It's something I'm committed to as mayor, with my fellow elected officials, with these groups and also with Parisians.
The mother of 3 is described as being a hard worker who keeps cool under pressure. But her critics say she's authoritarian. She may need both kinds of qualities to address a long list of challenges facing the country's capital.
And that report by Carl Brown. Cathy, both you and I, as Australian women, of course, are very aware of the difficulties of women in powerful positions. The previous Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, made a very powerful speech. Of course, she was the country's first female Prime Minister, but she made a very powerful speech that made headlines across the world about misogyny. There is a different standard applied to women when they reach that level, isn't there?
Yeah, because after all of the dud male politicians that one might decide are no good and turf out, to then say, well, we'll try a woman, and then if she turns out to be no good, it's yet to be normal enough the people accept that there are just as many, that there are just as many bad politicians that are women as men, or that there could be, or that they need to be judged on their job, not on their gender.
And as a cartoonist who's working for the Australian media at the time, how did you cover that?
I was fascinated by that whole spiel, and I saw it as it was a great galvanising moment, that speech, and I could see why that was impressive. But I also felt, and I think it tended to come true, that having never ever played into the matter of her gender, having never bit at the bait of so you think you got it tough because you're a woman. She had ignored things. She'd copped the satire, she'd copped the insults and all the rest of it, and never made a fuss about it. But the moment she did raise that issue, it was the beginning of the end for her. It was like she played that card, and that was over. And that was. It was terrible to see the doom written in that, even though it was perfectly true. And so much of what she said has now been played out in the government that we now have. That was the opposition that she was accusing at the time. She made some pretty grand predictions about white men in blue ties, and we're seeing it come to pass. So interesting.
Cathy Wilcox, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, and that's it for now. And if you'd like to comment on what you've just seen, please head to our Facebook page, Frans van Cat /the51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. Thanks for your feedback so far, and please keep those comments rolling in. Until our next program, bye for now.